Welcome back to the Anchored Podcast, the official podcast of the Classic Learning Test. My name is Soren Schwab, VP of Partnerships here at CLT, and today we're joined by Jason Bedrick. Jason Bedrick is a research fellow in the Center for Education Policy at the Heritage Foundation, where he focuses on policies that promote education freedom and choice, religious liberty, classical education, and restoring the primary role of families in education. Bedrick is the co-editor and co-author of two books, including Educational Freedom, Remembering Andrew Coulson, Debating His Ideas, and Religious Liberty and Education, a case study of yeshivas versus New York. He has also authored chapters in three books, including the Heritage Foundation's book, The Not So Great Society, which provides conservative solutions to the problems created by the ever-expanding federal footprint in preschool, K-12, and higher education. Bedrick is also an adjunct scholar with the Cato Institute, where he once served as a policy analyst with the Center for Educational Freedom. He's also served as the director of policy at EdChoice, a nonprofit founded by Milton and Rose Friedman to advance education freedom and choice. And I'm cutting some of the bio because that man is accomplished. Jason, it's so good to have you back on Anchored.
Thank you so much for having me. Good to be back.
Yeah, for our listeners, this is not your typical episode of going back to, talk to us about your educational background, because we've done that before. So our listeners should go back and listen to the episode with Jason from, I think it's been a couple of years now that you were on. And so going back to listening to that is probably, talking about school choice in a few states and look where we are now. So pretty exciting. Jason, we connected a few weeks ago in Phoenix and talked a little bit about this short piece, this declaration that was released not too long ago by the Heritage Foundation, the Phoenix Declaration, and it's short, it is succinct, it is to the point, and I was thinking we should talk about this, give our audience a chance to hear. From the horse's mouth, so to speak, because were you the co-author, the main author of the declaration?
There was a drafting committee. I was the chair of the committee. I took a crack at the first draft, but it went through, I think, 17 different revisions, so I can't take full credit for the final product. But we are very pleased with what we produced.
Yeah, no, it is fantastic, and I think it was Mark Twain when he talked about writing, and I think he wrote a letter to a friend, and he said, "I'm sorry, this letter is so long. I ran out of time, or I didn't have enough time to make it shorter, right? So like sometimes getting something short, precise, and to the point takes much longer. Talk to us kind of big picture, the what, when, why, and who of this Phoenix Declaration."
Sure. Well, the Phoenix Declaration is named not only for the city where it was conceived a year ago and then recently unveiled, but also for the mythical bird that rises out of the ashes of its former self.
Yeah.
And this is a project of renewal. We see our American education system essentially lying in ruins and in dire need of reform and renewal. And that in order to do that, we needed to get back to basics. We need to get back to first principles and clearly articulate them. For a long time, conservatives have essentially outsourced education to the left, intentionally or unintentionally, in many ways unintentionally, just saying, well, education should be a neutral space. I think the reality that we have learned the hard way is that there is no such thing as a value-neutral education. Education is an inherently value-laden enterprise, and
Amen.
The attempt to make it value-neutral actually just creates a vacuum that is then filled by others, and in many cases, filled with radical ideologues who have captured a lot of public schools and are using them not to educate but to indoctrinate. And conservatives have been fighting back against that, but they've been doing a better job articulating what we're against than what we're for. And what this does is say, here is a statement of principles that we are for. And we intentionally called it an American vision for education, not just conservative, because we want to make common cause with liberals and libertarians and centrists and others to reform our education system. We're not looking to replace left-wing indoctrination with right-wing indoctrination. We're looking for an American system of education grounded in the American tradition, which includes a tradition of disagreement politically. So we're not looking for schools to just pump out conservatives. We're looking for schools to cultivate classical civic virtues, to expose children to the best that's been thought and said, particularly in our Western and Judeo-Christian traditions, looking for children who are patriotic, who have an attachment to this country and its citizens, and who can disagree with each other civilly, which is, I think, something that we've lost. And so that is the project of the Phoenix Declaration in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that, and I'm just so pleased. I think pointing at the problem is important, right? And identifying that there is a problem and that we have it, and like you said, we're in ruins, and that's one thing. And I think the conversations oftentimes, especially on the social media, they revolve more around that, and it trends better, right, when you're attacking. But the fact that you guys are also thinking about, okay, that is the case, but let's also, what is the solution here? And I think that's really how you unite people, right? By a common cause and by solutions. And we're going to go through some of these pillars. But even listening to you kind of giving the basic overview, I mean, like 20, 30 years ago, like none of this would have been a controversial statement, right? I think that having the understanding too that just a lot has changed in the last 20, 30, 40 years. And I think you mentioned it, a back to basics kind of approach to education. None of this is in any way new or revolutionary, or I mean, it seems fairly quote unquote traditional. Does that seem accurate?
In some sense, yes. Although I wouldn't just say back to basics, because when people say back to basics, I think a lot of times what they're saying is, can't we just get back to a value neutral system where we're teaching the
Gotcha.
3 R's, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think we actually ever had that system, and we can't get back to that kind of system. What I'm saying is get back to first principles. And
Okay.
so we need to take, truth and goodness seriously, cultural transmission, character formation, academic excellence, and citizenship. All of those, I think the only one that schools have really been striving for is academic excellence. And even there, they haven't succeeded very well, perhaps to a great extent because they've abandoned all of the other pillars. And
Right.
A building that rests on only one pillar is not going to stand. So that's what we're trying to get back to.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And thanks for that clarification. Well, let's go through them and kind of love to get your thoughts. The first one is parental choice and responsibility. And my goodness, especially through COVID and beyond, kind of having a conversation again about the role of the parent and parental involvement, and kind of the curtains being lifted for the first time, maybe parents paying more attention to what's going on in the classroom. But yeah, from the Phoenix Declaration, what's kind of the stance that y'all took there on parental choice and responsibility?
Well, I'll read it just because I don't think we'll read all of the declaration, but this one is the opening principle after our preamble. It says, parents are the primary educators of their children. Parents should have the freedom to choose the learning environments that align with their values and best meet their children's individual learning needs, with public education funding following the child. Policy should respect the right and high duty of parents to raise their children and make decisions about their children's education. We thought it was important that this document starts with parents because for a lot of people today, they conceive of schools as pursuing social justice and no longer being an extension of parenting, working with parents, but essentially as agents of parents. They see themselves as teaching, freeing children from the prejudices of their parents. And so actually trying to inculcate values that are the opposite of what parents are trying to instill. And this is the wrong approach. And so by starting with parental choice and starting with the recognition that parents are the primary educators, we thought that was very important. And so if you believe parents are the primary educators, what follows from that is parental choice. So they should be able to choose the schools that align with their values. And then we think the money should then follow the child, right? Instead of we're going to establish the school and then we're going to assign kids to it based on the location of the home their parents can afford. No, we're actually going to have parents choose the school and the money is going to follow the child. That's what a system that respects parental choice comes from. This language about the right and high duty of parents to raise their children, it pays homage to the seminal U.S. Supreme Court decision, Pierce v. Society of Sisters, which was 100 years ago this year, where actually the KKK persuaded the state of Oregon to ban private education because they didn't want kids going to Catholic schools. And the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously overruled that and said, no, actually, parents have the right and high duty to raise their children. You can't outlaw private education, right? That children, in the Supreme Court's language, are not mere creatures of the state. But I think, too, conservatives sometimes talk too much about parental rights, and this idea that, the state doesn't own my children, I own my children. Well, it's true, the state doesn't own your children, but we don't own our children either. Actually, I think the right approach is that we are stewards of our children, right? And the reason that parents have rights is not because they own their kids the way I have rights over my property. It's because I have responsibilities for my children, the high duty to raise my children. And from that duty comes those rights. The rights respect my freedom to educate my children because I have a duty to educate my children.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. And again, I don't think that should be a controversial statement. But you hear, especially sometimes the language of the teachers' unions and protect our children, right? Almost using the that language of the the students belonging to the school, and like you said, I mean, we're hearing about isolating students from their parents, right, and not sharing information with their parents. And I think that's somewhat related to the second point about transparency and accountability as well. So maybe we can transition to that a little bit. If what you're saying is true, right, and the parents are the primary educator, then what is the role of the school? Is it as a secondary educator?
Yes, exactly. And that's how we start that the schools are the secondary educators. Parents are primary, schools are secondary, which means that the school should be working with the parents, not serving as replacements for the parents. And if that's the case, how do we hold schools accountable? We too often think of accountability in terms of government regulations, but the highest form of accountability is when an institution is directly accountable to the people who bear the consequences of their performance, right? So if it's the cable company, you want the cable company accountable to the people who are trying to, cable. That's sort of an outdated. Do we even have cable anymore? I don't know.
I don't even know.
But the point is, it's the end user. In this case, the end user, in some sense, is the children, but who can't really hold them accountable. But it should be the parents. We, for a long time, have been thinking about accountability as well. It's got to be some government regulation because the public schools are not directly accountable to parents. The public schools are accountable to an elected school board and various unelected bureaucrats in the state capitol. And that's been the system for so long, we've forgotten what real accountability looks like. And so we want to restore that and say, the schools need to be accountable to the parents. That means, first and foremost, they need to be transparent. Parents have a right to know what's being taught to their children,
Yes.
And how their children are performing. And there should never be any blanket policy that hides information about children's mental, emotional, and physical well-being from parents.
Yeah. I mean, and I was a little spoiled right after college. I taught at a classical charter school, and so we had an open door policy, and I would often have parents coming in, observing classes and asking me questions afterwards. Now, of course, there is a line to, right, if that's every day and they're just watching your every move. But I think the general posture was, we got nothing to hide, right? We want to make sure that we're partnering with you as the parent. Here's our curriculum. Here's the books that we read, the textbooks. And if you want to come in and see the school, and that's just not the norm in most schools, obviously. So that level of transparency is not there. Okay, so I think most listeners will probably follow those first 2 points and say, yeah, no, that's nothing too controversial there. Now we're getting to the controversial, right? Because now you're talking about truth. Truth and goodness. So interesting, kind of in classical education, we talk a lot about the transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty. And so you chose truth and goodness. So talk to us a little bit about the reason for including those two in the Phoenix Declaration.
Well, I can assure my classical friends that beauty is hidden in there, because, as everybody knows, beauty is truth, beauty. So it's still there. But so we say education must be grounded in truth. Students should learn that there is objective truth and that it is knowable. Science courses must be grounded in reality, not ideological fads. Students should learn that good and evil exist and that human beings have the capacity and duty to choose good. This is something I think that schools used to teach and no longer teach, at least consciously. But if schools have moved, I think, in a postmodern direction that says, well, there is no real truth. There's no truth with a capital T. There's only my truth. And that leads to relativism, and eventually nihilism. And what you're left with is essentially just the will to power. And that leads to a tyrannical society. And a free society has to be grounded in truth. And the classical liberal enterprise of education has to be grounded in truth. Even in math classes, I think it's important that children, when they're taking a math class, are learning, hey, we are learning things that are objectively true and we can prove it. And this isn't just, we're teaching you skills that you're going to need in the workplace someday. Because a lot of kids are saying, well, I have a calculator and I don't really need these skills. And, I might not be, a mechanical engineer or a physicist or whatever. So do I really need this stuff? Well, what you're learning is you're learning things that are true about the world. And you are, learning a way of thinking about the world, one that is grounded in observable reality and abstract truth. So we're not just empiricists, right? There's rationality here as well, both sort of in this statement. Now, yes, people are going to disagree over the truth. We're not saying there is only one truth and we know exactly what it is. But you and I can both agree that there is truth. We can both agree that it's knowable and do our best to pursue it, while understanding that we each have a different understanding of what that is. And so there's space for disagreement while we are collectively engaged in the same truth-seeking enterprise, right? So this is the balance that we're trying to seek in the statement. But if there is no truth, or truth is fundamentally unknowable, what are we even doing here in terms of the education? So that's why we started with this after we got, once we oriented ourselves toward, well, who's in charge here? Right? What's the relationship of parents and schools? Now we're talking about content. Well, if we don't start with the idea of truth and goodness, you can't even, there's nothing to build upon, right? It's a foundation of sand. And so we thought it was important that we explicitly state this.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. And I'm somewhat being facetious, right? But you alluded to it. I mean, there's a large population in this country that, when you mention truth, that's a non-starter, right? But as you mentioned earlier about, education being values neutral, like ultimately, education is grounded in some truth, right? And it just happened for a long time, happened to be kind of the progressive truth. And you're trying to bring it back to, I like that you mentioned reality, objective reality, right? That it's grounded in that. But I am wondering, for folks that read that, will they just assume, oh, that's just like religious language, right? I mean, you're just trying to, kind of shove your Judeo-Christian, values on our students. What would you say to that in response?
Well, I mean, let's just say I've already been called a Christian nationalist for
Yeah.
putting this document together. I think Peter Green in Curmudgeoncation made that very fascinating claim.
Boy.
If it's not obvious to your listeners, I'm not Christian. I'm an Orthodox Jew, but there many Christians involved in the writing this, as well as a number of Jews and others whose religious views I actually don't know. But no, I mean, look, this is it is obviously Judaism and Christianity and all religious traditions are going to have something very important to say about what truth is. But just thinking of this in terms of secular philosophical claims, we have to have some sort of a commitment to truth. And one of the great things about math is that this is something where no matter what your religion is, I think we can agree that math reveals certain truths about the world.
Yeah.
And that's an important thing for children to see, that there are objective facts, that not everything is just a matter of your viewpoint. Because again, we'll put it this way, Alexis de Tocqueville said, liberty cannot be established without morality, nor morality without faith. So that's important. We have to have, at the core of faith, there has to be an idea of that there is truth that you are believing in. So I just don't see us having a free society for much longer if we start abandoning the principles that undergird that free society.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. When I read the the next pillar, I was thinking of G.K. Chesterton, who said that education is simply the soul of a society as it passes from one generation to another. And your next pillar is cultural transmission, which I find fascinating. So it relates a little bit to what we just talked about, kind of the Judeo-Christian traditions. You mentioned kind of Western tradition, but yeah, speak to us a little bit about what do you all mean by cultural transmission?
Yeah, so I think one of the central purposes of education is transmitting humanity's accumulated knowledge and wisdom, and also our particular civilization's heritage to the next generation. Right? As we write, a civilization only survives if it intentionally transmits its history, traditions, and values, including its yet unrealized aspirations, to the next generation. True progress comes only by building on what has been learned and achieved in the past. So once you commit to that, what flows from that, we write, students should therefore learn about America's founding principles and its root in the broader Western and Judeo-Christian traditions. Now, the Western and Judeo-Christian traditions are overlapping, but are not exactly the same. Even in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition are not synonymous with each other. There's Eastern Christianity and Eastern Judaism, and there are other influences in the West that are neither Jewish nor Christian. So these are overlapping. But I think the reality is that the American tradition grows out of those Western Judeo-Christian, and particularly if you're thinking of it as a tree, the English branch of that tradition. And so in order to understand who we are, what our country is, what it has stood for, its founding story, you need to learn the history and traditions that it came out of. You need to learn about the English common law system and the Magna Carta, and you need to learn about the Scottish Enlightenment. You need to learn Also about the Roman Empire and its Greek forebears. You need to learn about how the Jewish traditions of the Bible and these Greco-Roman ideas sort of fused in um, uh, Christian medieval Europe, and so on and so forth. So you're not actually going to understand our society and what we stand for if you don't have a foundation in the roots of our society. And you know, I think it was Ronald Reagan who said that you can lose freedom in a single generation, right? And I think we're starting to recognize the wisdom of that. We have to be very intentional about passing this information on. Too many teachers think, well, you can just Google it, right? You don't really need facts anymore. You can just Google it, right? We've replaced history with social studies,
Yep.
right? So instead of learning things sequentially, well, we're just going to have a unit on innovators, right? And we're going to learn about Thomas Edison and Elon Musk. And then we'll have another unit on explorers, and we're going to learn about Marco Polo and Magellan and Columbus and Buzz Aldrin. And the kids don't have a sense of what came first, what came later, what the sequence and why these different discoveries or developments were important, what changed. You really have to do things essentially sequentially, and in order to transmit a culture, and we have moved away from that and are reaping the fruits of that failure right now.
Certainly. Got a few more to get to. I think the next one is so fascinating to me, right? Because I think today when you can just go out on the street and ask folks, hey, what's the point of education? The vast majority will probably say to get a better job, right, or to acquire certain skills. Well, that was really not the case for most of human history, and so it really was about whether you want to say to become more fully human or to cultivate wisdom and virtue, but it had something to do with character formation, and you guys are promoting that again, and so character formation as one of those pillars. But I want to pick your brain a little bit on academic excellence, because on the one hand, it seems like, right, I mean, we're the most advanced, educated when you look at degrees, right? Country, society, but something seems off. And so when you write about and think about academic excellence and what that should look like, whether it's in a homeschool or in a K-12 school, what are some of the features of a good academic kind of formation?
Sure. Well, I would just note first that we do put character formation first, and that is for a reason, because we do think that is more important, and then actually cultivating virtue is a requirement for academic excellence. And so you need excellence of the heart before excellence of the mind. So character formation comes first. But in terms of academic excellence, we write the following: that schools should prioritize a rigorous and content-rich curriculum. And again, that means we are striving for merit. We are not just passing kids along, social promotion. This isn't about equity, right? We are striving for excellence and content rich. This is not a progressive education. This is not just, choose your own adventure. There actually are things out there in the world that we need to know, and we should be intentional about sharing that with our children. Rooted in foundational subjects such as math, literature, science, history, civics, and the arts. Now, we put all of those because all of those are really important for education. And I think some on the right have said, well, the arts, literature, these things have been captured by the left. And, let's just retreat and focus on STEM, right? If we just teach our kids STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, they'll have access to good jobs later and, forget the rest. But what you're forgetting is the cultivation of virtue, is the cultivation of the soul, right? Which is done through literature, which is done through studying history, and citizenship, which is done through civics. So we really should not be abandoning all of these other ways of knowing things. Oh, and the arts too.
Right.
Um, you know, our students should be, looking at the paintings of Rembrandt and Van Gogh, and they should be, trying their own hand at imitating the great masters. And there is a great cultivation of, one's soul when they are engaged in the arts. It's unfortunately too often just sort of, an afterthought. Like, here, try and play this recorder, and here's here's some markers, do whatever you want. No, we really should be engaging. Actually, there's one of my favorite schools that takes this very seriously is Great Hearts out here in Arizona. I know they're in Texas and some other states too. But when you walk into a Great Hearts school, one of the first things you notice, if you've been to a bunch of different types of schools, is that they have great art all over the walls.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you'll find out is many of those are not originals. They're drawn by the students. By their senior year, they really are copying the masters and doing a great job. And then also, once they've spent a decade plus imitating the masters, now they're actually ready to produce art of their own that is of a very high quality. Not just what you'll find at the local modern art museum, which is a splatter on the wall or a banana duct taped on the wall or something like that. Actually something that is beautiful that you look at and say, wow, I wish I could do something like that. That's amazing. So we should not be abandoning the arts. And again, we write the emphasis should be placed on core knowledge and tried and true pedagogy rather than fads or experimental teaching methods. Stick with what works, make incremental progress, but
Sure.
radical experiments like going from phonics to whole language have proven disastrous.
Yeah.
There's this whole Soul the Story, what's her name, Emily Hannaford podcast, where she's like, yeah, we have forgotten actually how to teach kids how to read, and it's not that hard. We should be able to do this. But there's the education schools that are teaching our teachers are spending a lot more time teaching Frantz Fanon and how to inculcate social justice warriors than like how do you manage a classroom and teach kids how to read. It's a huge problem. So in that sense, we do want to get back to basics.
Yes, sir. Well, I think they call it the science of reading now because phonics is now this right wing. Whatever. As long as we get kids to read, I really don't care what we're gonna call it. But it's an interesting. I mean, what you're talking about. One of the prerequisites, though, is a general sense of humility and, if not veneration, for those who came before us, right? And a general sense of, talking a lot about, reading great books like Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, right? That the past, and yes, even these dead white guys, right, have something to teach us, right? That you call them the masters, have something to teach us. And that is such a stark difference, right, between visiting a classical school and going to maybe one of the more progressive public schools. I stopped calling them traditional public schools. Sometimes we still refer to them as, oh yeah, no, I go to the traditional public school, when nothing about them is in any
traditional
sense of the word traditional. Well, Jason, let's talk about that last one, which, as a non-American citizen, a proud green card holder, of course, I want to talk about. The last one is citizenship, and I've read it. I know where you're going with that, so I can get behind it. But talk to us a little bit about you don't
sound convinced though.
Well, that's why I brought you on, is to convince me. Can I be part of this without being a citizen? Now, talk to us about why you included citizenship, why you call it citizenship. You could have called it, patriotism or others, and what you mean by that.
Well, we think citizenship encompasses a lot more than just patriotism. And that is a part of it. The first line is, a republic depends upon an educated and patriotic citizenry, right? We recognize that education is trying to do a number of different things. Classical liberal education. What does the word liberal mean? We're not talking about political liberalism today. Liberal education is educating for freedom, right? Liberal, libertas, right? It is educating for freedom, to be a citizen in a free society, right? So it says that schools should teach students the civic virtues and civic knowledge necessary for self-government and the task of building a more perfect union, including the value of civil disagreement, which is something I think we've really lost. Schools should also foster a healthy sense of patriotism. So not just nationalism, not just, yay, we're the best, we're better than everyone else, but a healthy sense, which means that there actually is an attachment. I think we've gone too far in the opposite direction, where students are not proud of the country. They don't appreciate its accomplishments. Too many college students today, if you ask them about our founding fathers, so, ask them about George Washington, the first fact they'll give you is that he was a slaveholder.
He was a slave owner. Yep.
They don't have the background that slavery was, ubiquitous in human history, and that America is among the first nations that abolishes it. And it was very difficult, and we fight a whole civil war in order to do that. But it really reduces many of our founding fathers into these evil men. And if we were founded by a bunch of evil people that were enshrining white supremacy and racism in our founding documents, well, who wants to defend that kind of society? Who wants to perpetuate it? Right? The whole thing collapses if we lose an appreciation for the accomplishment of our founding fathers in writing the Declaration of Independence and signing the Constitution and building a society, with liberty and limited government. This is a real problem that we're facing. So schools should foster a healthy sense of patriotism and cultivate gratitude for and attachment to our country and all who serve its central institutions. We talk about how we need those shared civic rituals like the Pledge of Allegiance and the national anthem. These should be respected and revived. In many cases, schools have abandoned them. Students should develop a deep understanding of and respect for our nation's founding documents and the ideas they contain about ordered liberty, justice, the rule of law, limited government, natural rights, and the equal dignity of all human beings. Too often, you're getting textbooks where they're just reading a few paragraphs about the founding documents, but not actually reading the founding documents themselves, let alone reading primary sources like the Federalist Papers, or for that matter, the Anti-Federalist Papers, right? It concludes, students should learn the whole truth about America, its merits and failings, without obscuring that America is a great source of good in the world and that we have a tradition that is worth passing on. Right. So this means not the 1619 project that, magnifies our failings and ignores our successes and accomplishments, but also not a history curriculum that says, oh, well, the slaves were actually better off in some ways, and, that minimizes the sin of slavery or anything like that. No, we need to show the whole truth about America, warts and all. And I think when you do that, you come away with an appreciation of America as that, shining city on a hill, as a beacon of freedom in the world, but one that is not perfect. And the work is to form a more perfect union, not just to say, hoorah, we're the best. And this gets to, I think, our overall project. One of the reasons this came out of a conference that was called the Conservative Vision of Education Conference, but we actually call this an American vision for education, not a conservative one, because we see ourselves as making common cause with, classical liberals, libertarians, centrists, those even on the center left, who are committed to the American project. And that doesn't mean that you think we've been perfect. I think of Martin Luther King Jr. was so persuasive because he was saying to Americans, look, we all agree with the founding ideals of this country, but we as a society have failed to live up to them.
Yeah.
Right. Frederick Douglass makes a very similar, very compelling case that America is not living up to its ideals, which is why we say that you're not only passing on, sorry, one second. You're not only passing on its history, tradition, and values, but also its yet unrealized aspirations to the next generation. So anybody who is committed to those values is inside the tent. Those who are outside the tent are those who say, well, actually we need to replace the Constitution because it's just the enshrinement of white supremacy, or those on the far right who say, America's wrong turn was, at Locke, and, all of the founding principles of America really are a mistake, and we need to abandon the entire liberal project. I think that's, they're also essentially outside the tent. But again, we're not looking to replace left-wing indoctrination with right-wing indoctrination. We are looking to educate children for liberty, and we do that by exposing them to the great conversation. Thinking again of citizenship, they should be reading the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, right? Yeah. They should be hearing different parts of the debate. We intentionally cite both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson in the preamble because they were founding fathers at sort of two opposite ends of the political spectrum of their day. And students should be reading from the letters that they were sending to each other in their closing years, sort of justifying their own position and arguing with each other, both within what became the American political tradition, but different poles of it. And so we don't want to indoctrinate. Indoctrination is just the unquestioning acceptance of certain ideas and certain principles. We want kids who are educated for freedom. And that means sharpening their intellect with conflicting ideas that come from our tradition.
Yeah, well said. And I think for folks that are in support of that and in agreement of that, I think that's why we're seeing such an increase in whether they're liberal arts schools, colleges, classical schools, right? A re-embracing of that. But what I love about your work, and I think CLTs as well, is we hold ourselves accountable by being grounded in truth, goodness, and beauty. And if that's our quote unquote bias, if that's our bent, then we're okay with that. If that's our quote unquote values. But it's important. But thank you for casting that vision. And we have our qualms with the College Board and with ACT, certainly do. But I think that's just not going to help long term, right? We need to cast a vision why we think we're the superior standardized test, and in line with what you shared with us. So Jason, I appreciate your work. I encourage everyone to follow the work of the Heritage Foundation. I know there's a lot of talk and about you all, and but really, when you read this piece and many of the other pieces, it is common sense. It's well rounded. It's principled. And we're excited to lock arms with you all. So, Jason, thank you for your work on the Phoenix Declaration. If anyone wants to follow you in your work, what was the best place to kind of go for that?
Well, they can follow me on X. I'm at Jason Bedrick, and they can read the Phoenix Declaration by going to heritage.org/Phoenix-Declaration. There's a dash in between the Phoenix and Declaration. So heritage.org/Phoenix-Declaration. And I hope people will check it out. We would love to see school boards adopt this as the principles that they're going to follow in their own districts. I think it's helpful to get school leaders and school board members asking the right questions. Is our curriculum really cultivating these civic virtues? Is it cultivating patriotism? And what about the hidden curriculum? Are we doing anything for Memorial Day or Veterans Day, or are these just days off? All of these sorts of things it will get them asking, I think, the right questions, right, and lead to positive reform and renewal of our American education system.
I think it's going to lead to a lot of healthy, good conversations and hopefully an intentionality, right? That maybe for some of these schools was missing. Jason, you're the man. Really appreciate you. You've been a good friend to CLT. Thank you for all your work. We could probably do another episode just talking about updates in school choice. I'm sure while we were recording, there were several things happening, but has to be it for today. Again, we're here with Jason Bedrick, Research Fellow in the Center for Education Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Jason, thank you much for coming on Anchor today.
Thank you so much for having me.